On that faithful day, as the dawn broke over Abidjan, a strange calm blanketed the city. Armored vehicles rolled through the streets, not to intimidate, but to reassure. The usual propaganda was absent from the airwaves. Instead, a quiet buzz of anticipation coursed through radios across the nation. A whisper of change was becoming a roar. At 3:27 a.m., every major frequency transmitted a single anonymous message. Alassane Ouattara is expected to resign in the coming hours. Prepare for transition. Prepare for ownership. The public didn't panic. They exhaled. For more than a decade, Ouattara ruled the Ivory Coast, not by consensus, but through legal loopholes, economic leverage, and the unspoken consent of powerful allies abroad. Once celebrated as a reformer, he later symbolized stagnation, manipulation, and dependency. But the streets had changed. This was no longer the Ivory Coast of IMF reforms and French policy sermons. It was a country awakened, shaped by its own struggles and inspired by neighboring revolutions. The era of polite subjugation, dressed as diplomacy, was nearing its end. The message was clear. Ouattara was cornered, not yet fallen, but no longer in command. In army bases, final preparations took place. Journalists were summoned, cameras tested, flags raised, not as decoration, but as a declaration. This wasn't just about removing a man from office. It was about retiring a legacy of external control disguised as leadership. He had entered with Western applause. He would exit under African pressure. Every fall from power has a backstory, a slow erosion masked by the illusion of permanence. Ouattara's fall had been a decade in the making. He arrived in 2011 as the polished technocrat, the economic savior, the West's golden partner in Francophone Africa. But beneath that image, a different reality festered. By 2020, his third-term bid, justified by a constitutional reset, ignited protests. People died, dissenters were jailed or chased into exile. International reactions were muted. To the world, he remained dependable. And predictability, it seems, is the global currency of influence. But inside the country, discontent hardened into clarity. Corruption surged, services collapsed, jobs vanished, foreign troops stayed, foreign companies thrived, and the people began asking, why not us? Inspired by upheavals in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, a new faction within the military emerged. Young, nationalistic, and trained not in Paris, but in Ouagadougou and Conakry. They didn't crave chaos. They sought clarity. In the stillness of a Monday morning, they moved, swiftly and without bloodshed. Ouattara was detained, the presidency secured, the people informed. He will speak. He will resign. We begin again. History isn't shaped by those who seize power, but by those who cling to it too long. Inside a secure facility near Yamoussoukro, Ouattara sat in silence. No advisors, no press, just a folded sheet of paper and the burden of accountability. It wasn't a demand, it wasn't vengeance. It was an opportunity for truth. The speech began, to the people of Ivory Coast. And it ended with the most awaited line in Ivorian history, I hereby resign. Yet he hesitated, not from ego, but fear. Fear of being abandoned by the powers that once praised him. Fear that his decade of alliances, deals, and diplomacy had given him only borrowed legitimacy, and his fear was justified. France offered no rescue. The U.S. issued a bland statement. ECOWAS remained muted. The mighty president now walked alone. Meanwhile, General Sékou Doumbia, head of the Military Transition Council, finalized logistics for the press briefing. His message was simple. This will not be a spectacle. It will be closure. At 11, AM, the nation watched in held breath as the screen lit up. No flags, no insignia, just a man at a desk. Ouattara spoke, not as a ruler, but a man aware his era had ended. He admitted what few expected. Yes, I served foreign interests more than I served you, not from hatred but fear. But you have proven me wrong. He resigned not as a man defeated, but one awakened. There was no anthem, no military parade, just silence. Across the country, people wept, not for him, but for themselves, for years of quiet endurance, for the weight finally lifted. Within an hour, global headlines lit up. Ivorian president resigns amid military transition. Unexpected end to Western allies' rule. A new model for African power shifts. In Paris and Washington, panic set in. France scrambled to protect its investments. The US scrambled for messaging. Privately, leaked cables showed their true concern. If the Doumbia doctrine spreads, the Francophone order collapses. But in Africa, the reaction was proud. Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, Niger all hailed the transition as a victory for dignity. In Senegal, students rallied, "If he can go, so can ours." In the DRC, a young activist declared, "Africa no longer needs permission to be free." Back in Abidjan, the focus shifted from toppling a regime to something greater, redefining governance. General Doumbia did not seize the stage. He rejected the crown. In a plain uniform, in a modest hall, he addressed the nation. "We are not here to lead. We are here to reset." The room fell silent. This was no ordinary coup. This was revolution by restraint. Doumbia outlined a 90-day civic consultation period, town hall forums across every region, civilian-led transition assemblies, a ban on military candidates in future elections, full audits of foreign agreements, regional calls for African-led governance models. His final words became legend. "We are not taking power, we are returning it to the soil that birthed it." That phrase echoed across Africa, from murals in Bamako to hashtags in Johannesburg. In Ivory Coast, decentralized democracy bloomed, not perfect, but authentic. In Bouaké, farmers debated land rights. In San Pedro, fishers demanded marine protection. In Man, retired teachers pushed for a Pan-African curriculum. The press covered every forum. Radio stations gave real-time updates. Social media surged with a new identity. Ivoirien souverain, Ivorian and sovereign. Then came a moment that sparked a continent. A 16-year-old girl in Grand Bassam stood at a forum and said, "We don't want to vote every 5 years. We want to speak every day." Her words reached 14 million people in 2 days. Ivory Coast wasn't reforming. It was remembering itself. The rebuilding began, not with skyscrapers, but with trust. In Korogo, youth launched a solar energy project. In Go, women's groups formed food cooperatives. In Abidjan, volunteers audited ghost schools and reopened clinics. The military stood back, not as rulers, but guardians. International lenders returned, but this time they were met with conditions: no loan without oversight, no contract without value retention, no partnership without parity. A new constitution was born, forged with public input. It included unchangeable term limits, mandatory financial disclosures for officials, a Pan-African diplomacy office, and protections against foreign political funding. The diaspora returned, engineers, doctors, artists, not to fix but to belong. 12 months later, Ivory Coast held its freest election in history. No violence, no foreign observers, no manipulation, just people choosing. The winner, not a party, but a civic movement, Nouvelle Racine, the new route. On Inauguration Day, there were no red carpets, no foreign dignitaries. The ceremony took place in a public square. The president stood with the people. The military saluted the citizens. Doumbia was absent. He had returned north quietly, his parting words, "I will not become what we fought to undo." His final message, "Africa does not need permission to be free. We only need to remember who we are when we stand alone and together." Across the continent, a shift had begun. In Chad, opposition groups launched sovereignty forums. In Togo, officers refused orders to suppress protests. In Senegal, calls to re-examine colonial-era treaties grew louder. The West did not collapse, but it lost what it never admitted it had: control. In its place, a new African century quietly began, not through headlines, but in homes, not through decrees, but through voices once silenced. Ivory Coast didn't just oust a president, it erased the fear of trying, and in doing so it reminded a continent the future does not belong to those who wait, it belongs to those who begin. And from the streets, a new anthem rose, not written by government decree, but sung by a people remembering their power. Months passed, and yet the world still whispered the name of a nation that once followed, now leading. Ivory Coast had done the unthinkable. It had not only survived a non-violent power shift, but had rewritten the rules of post-colonial governance without bloodshed, occupation, or foreign validation. That act alone shifted the center of gravity in Africa. It wasn't just a political event, it was a spiritual awakening. The spirit of sovereignty was contagious. In Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traoré invited Ivorian civic leaders to speak before his National Youth Council. In Guinea, Doumbouya scrapped plans to extend military rule, citing Doumbia's restraint as a new ethical benchmark. In Niger, revolutionaries began using the term the Ivorian Path in pamphlets calling for grassroots constitutional conventions. Even in countries that weren't ready to move, conversations began to shift from fear of instability to questions of dignity. Meanwhile, in Western capitals, silence turned into scrutiny. Think tanks convened. Analysts puzzled over a new equation they had never factored into their models: people plus courage, external permission, freedom. The IMF sent envoys, expecting the usual pageantry and deference. Instead, they were handed a 300-page document, written by university students and rural cooperatives, detailing loan demands, environmental protections, and sovereign compliance clauses.